This is my brand new computer. I'm also in a house that's not my own. But that's okay. I'm house sitting this week for my friend Jillian while she is out of town, taking care of her cat and her chickens in her house. Um, but I didn't want to wait anymore for um, new streams. So we're coming at you live from in 720p. Um, we're gonna read the Nancy Drew files. Hello, Shannon. We're gonna read the final scene book. I mean, I'm not spending all my time in the house. I still have like regular work and stuff to do, but yeah, it's been cool. Just kind of making sure nobody like breaks into her house and stuff. I hope you guys are doing well today. I'm excited to get into this. I'm excited to be on my new computer. Sorry I don't have all my bells and whistles. I didn't want to pack my green screen and my fancy mic and stuff like that to bring all the way over to the house where I'm sitting. So I just packed the basics, but I still hope that the stream is good. Oh, that's fine, Shannon. No worries at all. This is going to be primarily an audio-only stream anyway. No, I didn't want anybody to be like, where's your green screen? There we go. That's a little better. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Without further ado, I'm probably going to just go ahead and jump in here. If you guys can hear the music, let me know, and if the music is too loud, also let me know. But I'm going to read the description real quick. When a handsome teen idol comes to Nancy's hometown, crime grabs the spotlight. Film star Brady Armstrong is in River Heights for the premiere of his newest movie at the Grand Old Century Cinema. When Nancy's friend Bess decides to go backstage to see her heartthrob, she stumbles into a kidnapping meant for the movie actor. But the kidnapper doesn't want ransom money. He demands that the planned demolition of the Century Cinema Theater be halted, or Bess be destroyed with it. Unable to prevent the wreckers from tearing down the building, Nancy races against time to discover where Bess is hidden and unmask the mysterious figure who is dead set on stealing the show. So that's the description of the book. It's very dramatic. Hello, Tara. Good morning, and thank you so much for letting me know everything's good. Oh, you guys have the cover. That's the cover. Isn't that so exciting? Alright, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I'm going to try to get through 5 chapters today. That's about a third of the book. Chapter 1. Bess, will you stop messing with your hair? You look great, and what's more important, Brady will think you look gorgeous. Nancy Drew struggled to make her voice heard above the screams of hundreds of teenagers crowded outside River Heights Century Cinema Theater. Her blue eyes were twinkling with amusement as she watched her friend Bess Marvin toy with her long blonde curls. Bess's cousin George Fane was gently lifting and dropping one of Bess's curls. You must have a whole can of mousse on your head, George said, running a hand through her own short dark hair. A hurricane couldn't budge your hairdo. Bess fiddled with the clip-on rhinestone earring that kept slipping off her right ear. Come on, guys, she said. The last time I saw Brady Armstrong, I was just a chubby little freshman, and he was a handsome, sophisticated senior. Now that he's a famous movie star, I want to look really good for him. I can't believe you're still in love with him after all these years, George teased. 90% of the female population is in love with Brady Armstrong, Nancy said as the 3 friends headed for the front of the theater. And the other 10% is blind, Bess observed, staring at the life-size movie poster at the side of the main entrance. Nancy watched Bess take in the photo of Brady, dressed as the space knight Jonathan Ryder. He was wearing the white spacesuit and holding the glistening laser sword that he had become famous for. Night of the Venus Moon was his latest movie, the 3rd in a series of sci-fi adventures starring Brady and a beautiful red-headed actress named Deirdre McCullough. Don't you wish you were Deirdre just for 10 minutes? Bess continued to gaze enraptured at the poster. George laughed and nudged Nancy. Bess has it bad. Nancy nodded. She does, but can you blame her? He is gorgeous. Just look at his green eyes and all that wonderful black hair. But still, he isn't as cute as Ned. Now that's loyalty, George teased. Bess and George laughed, but Nancy found herself missing her boyfriend, Ned Nickerson, terribly. He was the only guy she ever truly loved, but she didn't get to see him too often because he was a student at Emerson College. She could hardly wait for his next break. Ned's cute, but Brady's what I'd call a hunk, Bess said, her eyes still riveted to the photograph. Apparently you're not the only one who thinks so, George added, eyeing the crowd of girls behind the police barrier that let out a single scream as a van and 2 cars slowed down in front of the theater. One of them was carrying a sign that read, "Marry me, Brady." The 3 girls turned to see what had caused the latest commotion. The local news was arriving. But Bess fingered her curls again and straightened the scoop neck of her teal blue sweater dress. She looked perplexed and sad. Nancy guessed what was bothering Bess. She linked her arm through her friend's. "It looks like everyone else read the same issue of Teen World that you did." "And I thought I was being so smart." Bess looked as if she were about to cry. "Don't worry, Bess," George said, trying to reassure her cousin. "Just because everybody else read that Brady always arrives early for a personal appearance doesn't mean they've got you beat." "Sure," Nancy added. "I'd guess we've still got a little time before Brady gets here. It should be enough." "For what?" Bess asked. "To find a way in," Nancy said with a laugh. "After all, I am a detective, right?" Bess gave her a wan smile, and before Nancy could turn her attention to finding an entrance that wasn't blocked by fans or police, George elbowed her in the side. "What's that all about?" George asked, nodding toward a dozen or more people carrying large pieces of cardboard mounted on sticks, picket signs. But the signs were down, and the girls couldn't read them. The group was gathering in a circle off to the side of the ticket office. One good-looking, dark-haired young man seemed to be in charge. He was giving directions and pointing to a clear stretch of street in front of the theater. "They don't look like your run-of-the-mill Brady Armstrong groupies to me," Bess said with a note of concern in her voice. "Quick," Nancy said, "we can use the diversion to sneak around to the back of the theater. We'll try a side door." She led Bess and George past the pickets. As the girls rounded the theater, they saw a large, dignified-looking private guard standing in front of the old stage door. Luckily, he didn't see them. "Well, maybe not," Nancy said, sizing him up. "Let's check out the back door." That door was unguarded, but locked tight. Nancy cast a sympathetic look at her friend. "I'm sorry, Bess. I don't see how we're going to get inside." Bess was determined. "I have to get in there," she said. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. "Wait a minute, I just remembered something." She led them to the parking lot and then behind a row of thorny bushes. "Why are you taking us through these weeds?" George glanced around to see if anyone was watching their suspicious behavior, but there was no one in sight. "I just remembered something from when I worked here as an usher 2 summers ago." Bess swooped down to gingerly brush away some dry twigs, soda cans, and candy wrappers from a rusty metal door buried in the ground. "Working here did have its advantages. This is our way in," she said proudly. "Here, let me do that," Nancy offered. "We don't want you to meet Brady looking like you've been playing in the dirt." She smiled as she took over the job of pulling at the door. "Have you been sneaking into movies for free?" George teased Bess with a quick grin. "No, of course not," Bess replied indignantly. "But I could have, and I think my honesty is about to be rewarded." The old rusted lock came free in Nancy's hand. With a final grunt, Nancy lifted the heavy steel door and revealed a dark staircase below. Nancy smiled and shook her head. "Love is funny," she said. "You wouldn't break into the theater to save a price of a ticket, but you'd do it to get a look at a guy you think you love." "Does this make this a crime of passion?" George asked innocently as Nancy led them down the dark stairs. "Oh, stop it, you guys," Bess said, carefully choosing her footing. She was wearing high-heeled, sling-back pumps for the occasion, and with all the excitement, she wasn't too steady on her feet. "I just want a chance to see him alone for 2 minutes. I have to know if he remembers me after all this time." Nancy reached into her purse and pulled out a small but powerful pin light. They were in the basement of the theater, a dark, damp, musty place that smelled of mold and decay. Nancy cut a path with her flashlight through the maze of boxes, old trunks, and stage props that had collected over the years from community theater productions. On the far side of the room was a staircase. "Oh, Nancy," Bess said as she looked up the stairs. "I'm so excited I think I'm going to faint. Just think, a chance to see Brady Armstrong again." George glanced at Nancy and slowly rolled her eyes as they trailed Bess up the stairs. Bess nudged the door open and peered up and down the hallway. "The coast is clear," she said. "Let's go." With Bess in the lead, they sneaked down the hall to the dressing rooms. 2 doors were marked with gold stars. "Well, this must be the place," Nancy said, pointing to the letters that spelled out Brady's name. She glanced over at Bess and saw that her friend's face was pale beneath her pink blush. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Sure," Bess said and forced her breath out in one long stream. "Just a little nervous, I guess. Do you think he'll remember me? Do you suppose he'll get mad at me for barging in on him like this?" "I don't think he'll get mad," Nancy said. "Brady was always a nice guy. Besides, you look great." Bess smiled at the encouragement. Then she lifted her chin, her eyes bright with determination. "I came this far. I'm not going to chicken out now. Besides, I blew half my fall wardrobe budget on this dress. I want him to at least see it." "We'd offer to come in with you," Nancy said, "but I'm sure you'd like to be alone." Bess grinned and waved her hand to motion them away. "Thanks anyway, but I'll sink or swim on my own. Will you wait for me? I'll come find you when I'm finished. Wish me luck." George looked her cousin up and down, appreciating Bess's teal blue sweater dress with its silver sequin and gold bugle bead trim. "You don't need luck. You look great. Knock on his door and knock him dead." Nancy and George walked farther down the hall toward the women's dressing room, giving their friend a chance to be alone with her nervousness and her heartthrob. Halfway down the hall, Nancy and George turned to watch as Bess knocked once, then again. No one answered. As she was raising her hand to knock once more, they all heard voices floating down the hall from the stage. The shuffling of feet and droning of voices sounded like 8 or 10 people moving toward them. Nancy knew Brady and Deirdre had to be at the center of the group. "Bess is ducking into his room," George said, shaking her head. "Boy, she's really got nerve when it comes to guys." Nancy looked on in disbelief. "She actually went inside?" "Well, I don't want to get caught hanging out here either," George said as the voices moved closer. "I'm just an admirer, not the president of his fan club." "Come on." Nancy and George slipped into a room marked Women's Dressing Room. She flipped on the wall switch, and the room was instantly bathed in bright light. Makeup mirrors lined the far wall. To their right, costumes hung on a long rack. Flapper dresses, Victorian gowns, Roman togas, and cowgirl outfits with leather fringe. The girls listened at the door to hear if the group had moved closer toward them, but there was no more movement. Nancy eased the door open, and they peered out through the narrow slit. Brady was at the center of the stationary group, and there was the mayor, and Nancy closed the door, not wanting to get caught. "He's even more gorgeous in real life," George said, and moved over to investigate the costumes. "What do you suppose that protest outside was all about?" she asked as she fingered the fringe on a cowgirl outfit. "That was Nicholas Falcone in charge," Nancy said. "I recognized him from pictures in the paper. He leads campaigns to save old buildings from demolition." "That's right, and Bart Anderson's going to tear down this beautiful old theater to build one of those impersonal movie complexes." "So Brady's premiere is the last big event to happen here," Nancy said sadly. "No more movies, no more community theater productions." The girls waited and listened, and in a few minutes they heard the group start their goodbyes and begin to move off. Then the sound of screaming teenagers filing into the auditorium masked all other sounds. The chants of "Brady! Brady! Brady!" that had started outside the theater were now louder and more impatient. Finally, a voice over the PA system began the introduction for Brady Armstrong's new movie, and everything became quiet except for a couple of goodbyes in the hall. "Maybe Bess's visit with Brady has started and is going better than she hoped," Nancy said with a smile. "Maybe that new dress did the job and he's on his knees this moment proposing." "I hope not," George replied playfully. "If he even touched her hand, she'd faint. If he proposed, she'd drop dead in her tracks of heart failure. On the other hand, that might be..." The sound of a single male voice crying out in the hallway interrupted Nancy. "Help! Somebody help! Get the police!" Nancy and George ran out of the dressing room and straight into the object of Bess's affection. Brady Armstrong, in the flesh, was standing in the middle of the hall. His normally tan face was white, and his green eyes were wide with shock. He was having trouble breathing. "What is it?" Nancy asked, a sick feeling in her stomach. "Are you all right?" "In there!" He pointed back to his open dressing room. "I walked in and someone attacked me, someone wearing a ski mask. I was grabbed around the throat," he finally got out. George and Nancy looked at each other. Their faces quickly turned as white as Brady's. "There was someone else in there too," Brady added, gasping to catch his breath. "A blonde girl, and she's still in there with that maniac." End of chapter 1. think that what Tara said about the Iceland thing is really a spoiler.
Bookstream celebration.
Aww! Thank you so much, Moocher. Shannon, I'm glad you figured out how to put the audio over hands-free. Hello while you drive to work. Bess, you have an odd way of flirting with a ski mask. Thank you so much. 11 months in a row. That's so crazy. Thank you so much, Moocher. I appreciate it so much. My host, or the people that I'm house sitting for, left me cheerwine in the fridge. I'm very happy. Alright, shall we continue? I just have to comment, like, on my old computer, like, read streams where I had music going and my bot going and everything, my CPU usage was like 15, 18. Right now I'm at 2.5 on my new computer and it makes me happy. I always flirt with a ski mask and also have a spare if my date has forgotten hers. Very smart. Smart idea. That'll get her. Okay, chapter 2. Bess! George and Nancy raced for the dressing room door, but Brady pushed ahead of them and ran into the well-lit room first. Nancy blinked, but not from the bright light. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, or rather what she wasn't seeing. The mystery strangler wasn't there, and neither was Bess. Nancy turned to Brady. Where are they? Brady looked thunderstruck. I don't know. They were right here a minute ago, and George was already searching for her cousin. She looked behind the leather sofa, under the heavy oak dresser, and behind the antique dressing screen. Bess! Nancy and George cried out together. Where are you? Only thick silence answered them. I take it she's your friend? I should never have left, but I was so dazed that I just... Brady couldn't finish his sentence. Nancy could tell he was as upset as they were. You couldn't know, Nancy said. She tried to be as reassuring as possible. Aren't you Nancy Drew? I remember you from school, Brady asked. Uh-huh, and our friend is Bess Marvin. Do you remember her? Brady nodded and looked even more devastated. Nancy searched the room once again. There had to be a logical explanation. Look, she's got to be here, George said, trying to be her practical self. Still, her shaky voice told Nancy how worried she really was. You said she was in here with a person in a ski mask? You never left the hall, and we joined you almost instantly. There's only one door leading out of this room. Therefore, as Nancy turned to point at the door... As George turned to point at the door, Nancy saw 3 people standing on the threshold. Deirdre McCullough, Joseph Hughes, who had worked at the theater for years, and another man in a burgundy sports coat whom Nancy had never seen before. Behind this threesome stood an even larger crowd of people. 2 men with cameras slung over their shoulders, a woman with her hands full with what Nancy knew were makeup cases, and a teenage boy, a suitcase in one hand and 2 garment bags in the other. They looked bored and quickly set their equipment down and talked among themselves. Apparently they were used to waiting and hadn't heard Brady's screams for help. Brady rushed over to the man in the burgundy sports coat. You're not going to believe what just happened. Someone in a ski mask tried to nab me, but he or she got this girl instead. Now we don't even know where they are, and... Deirdre gasped and put her hand over her mouth. Oh no, she managed to say. What? The man's face turned a deep shade of crimson that nearly matched his jacket. What are you talking about? He asked. Joseph looked over at Nancy and George, whom he knew, and said, What's going on here, girls? We don't really know, except that Bess is missing, Nancy said to Joseph. He looked shocked. Missing? Nancy nodded and went over to Brady to put a comforting hand on his arm. Brady, can you tell us exactly what happened? Before Brady could begin his story, the man in the burgundy sports coat cleared his throat and pointedly addressed Nancy. I'm Simon Mueller, he said. Brady and Deirdre's manager. Not that it's actually any of your business. Now what I want to know is, who are you, and why are you asking all these questions? This is Nancy Drew, Joseph said, coming to the girl's assistance, and her friend George Fain. You may have heard of Nancy. She's River Heights' best-known detective. Simon didn't seem impressed. He ignored Nancy and turned to Brady. Okay, Brady, what you're saying is that while I was escorting these local dignitaries to their seats for the movie, someone in a ski mask tried to kidnap you? Nancy caught Deirdre looking at Simon quizzically. Brady nodded. Nancy was about to ask another question when Simon interrupted her again. And just how did that happen? Before Brady could answer, Simon went on. Well, let's get this story over with. Nancy couldn't believe the way that Brady's manager was talking to him as if he were a kid, and Brady was letting him. Also, Simon wasn't taking any of it the least bit seriously, and Bess was missing. Not able to wait any longer, Nancy spoke up impatiently. What happened when you got to the theater? She asked. Deirdre stepped forward and put a hand on Brady's shoulder. We came inside with a lot of local politicians and dignitaries. We stood around and chatted, then Brady said he had to change. I escorted our guests to their seats. Simon was outside still, she said pointedly, looking at Simon. So that was it. Simon hadn't been with them, Nancy thought, filing away the information. And when did you let yourself into the room? And when you let yourself into the room, exactly what did you see, Brady? She asked. The lights were off, so I turned them on, and that's when I saw her, the blonde girl, sitting over there on the sofa, and she had a gag in her mouth. Out of the corner of her eye, Nancy saw George shudder slightly. Bess's situation was even worse than she imagined. I think I asked her something like, "What are you doing here?" Brady continued. That was when the man in the ski mask attacked me. Was the person a man? Nancy asked. Well, I mean, I don't know, actually, Brady said after considering. With that mask on, I didn't see a face, but I thought it was a man. He grabbed me around the throat, but I pushed him back and he lost his balance. Then I ran into the hall to get help. Brady shook his head and dragged his fingers through his thick black hair. I wish I'd done something to help that girl. She looked so scared, but I thought I needed to get help. He gave Nancy and George a long look. You don't know how rotten I feel about this. Nancy found herself staring into Brady's green eyes. He really did look upset. So this person in a ski mask still has your friend? Deirdre asked. Tears glittered on her long lashes. Her famous green eyes were wide with concern as she patted Brady with a perfectly manicured hand. It looks that way, Nancy said, and who knows where he's got her. We've got to do something, Nan, George said. Joseph shook his gray head. She's such a sweet child. We worked here one summer, you know. I got to be really fond of her. Nancy cut him off. I know, Joseph, but just standing here isn't going to get her back. Every minute counts in a kidnapping case. So what's the plan? George asked. She looked at her friend expectantly. Well, there's only one door leading out of this room and no windows, Nancy observed. First we have to figure out how they left this room. Well, actually, Joseph walked over to the large closet and carefully opened the door. This old theater has secret passageways everywhere, and here's one of them. He pulled back the clothes that were hanging in the wardrobe, including Brady's white Space Knight costume, to reveal a small sliding door in the back wall. Where does this door lead? Nancy asked. To the leading lady's dressing room, Joseph replied. Then he grinned sheepishly. In the old days, when this was still a full-time theater for plays, there was usually a romance going on between the stars who played this theater. I'd say there was quite a bit of traffic through this door over the years. So the kidnapper had to have taken Bess out this door after Brady left the room, George said excitedly. Nancy took a deep breath and realized she and George were thinking the same thing. And they could still be in the leading lady's dressing room. Well, let's have a look, Joseph said, and he slid the door open. One by one, they slipped through the narrow door and entered the other room. Joseph stumbled through the darkness to the opposite wall. Nancy held her breath, hardly daring to hope as he flipped on the light. One quick glance around this room told her everything. Bess wasn't there. This room was the same size as the leading man's, but it was decorated with a white satin sofa, a pink chaise lounge, and a delicately carved dressing table with a gilded mirror. It had been a beautiful, glamorous room. Now it was a little worn and threadbare. This room is as empty as Brady's, George said, sounding defeated. We don't know any more than we did. Yes, we do, Nancy replied. Now we know how he got her away from us. How? Brady looked completely puzzled. I mean, I know how he got her out of my dressing room, but how did he get her out of here, since Bess obviously isn't here? While Brady, George, and I were searching Brady's dressing room, the abductor probably sneaked her out into the hall. Before Deirdre, Simon, and the crew got here, it had to be empty. But where are they now? Joseph asked. Nancy exhaled out loud as she realized they could be anywhere. From here, she could have taken She could have been taken to the basement or upstairs or out an exit, or they could still be here in the theater. She finished slowly. Look, I'm sorry about your friend, but I honestly think she'll turn up. It's probably just a stunt to meet Brady. Brady and Deirdre have to get dressed and greet their fans during the intermission, and they've got to do it now. Mr. Mueller, this is no stunt, I can promise that, Nancy said, giving Simon a hard look. And I'm gonna find her even if we have to cancel your premiere. Go right ahead and try, young lady, Simon said. You'll have a lot more than me to contend with. You try to tell all those fans out there why Brady and Deirdre won't be showing. He pulled on Brady's arm and started toward the door. By the way, Miss Nancy Drew, private detective, your friend is still in the building. He threw over his shoulder. Wait a minute, Simon, Brady said, stopping short. What makes you think she's still here? Simon answered Brady sincerely. The theater's full of people right now. It's surrounded by cops. It'd be simpler for him to hide her than to try to leave with her. Now come on, Brady, let's go. I think we'd better call the police, Nancy said. This is a kidnapping after all. Can't we just go and get a police officer from outside the theater? George wanted to know. No, I think we've got to call headquarters and make it official. You can use the phone in my office, Nancy, Joseph said, and I'll go alert the theater's ushers and guards to what's happened. They can all help look for her. Don't worry, girls. If Bess is in this theater, I promise you, we're going to find her. Nancy looked at George and saw the tears pooled in her friend's eyes. Nancy could not remember the last time she'd seen George cry. I guess we have a new case, Nan, George said. Her voice was thin and choked. Nancy swallowed and nodded. The knot kept rising in her throat. She had a case all right, one she had to solve right away, because her friend's life depended on it. End of chapter 2. Let me catch up. If anybody don't break my heart, my achy break heart, Billy Ray. I did start dancing. Mambo number 5, a little bit of Monica. Hello, Summer. Thank you so much for the host, and thank you for the bits, Timo. Hope you guys are doing well. Yeah, Everybody Mambo is a reference to a Goofy movie. Everybody Mambo! Thank you for the host as well, Timo. Never would have guessed that. Yeah, that's right. Coming at you in 720p. Yeah, audio does have a higher bit rate as well. Thank you for being here for a moment, Summer. I hope you have a wonderful day. Yeah, I am. I'm wearing my Goofy movie shirt too. Nicole, hello. How are you? I thought I wasn't subbed. I was gonna subscribe. What the heck? Aww. You make me happy just by being here. Oh, that's exactly what Tara said. Hello, Salad. I hope you have a wonderful day at the water park with your girlfriend. Be safe. Make sure you wear your sunscreen and stay hydrated. I know you're going to be in water, but make sure you're drinking water as well. Oh my goodness. That was a lot of bits. 500 bits. Thank you. I didn't notice. I just heard the little thing. That was sweet. Thank you so much. All right, shall we move on? We're going to move on to chapter 3. I think one thing I have noticed so far, the biggest difference is obviously in the game, Bess and George are not with you, and it's Nancy's friend Maya that gets kidnapped. And in the game, Simon is Simone. They've turned him into a woman in the game. Kind of how they did with Professor Hotchkiss, I noticed in the Treasure in the Royal Tower book. So the Treasure in the Royal Tower book, Professor Hotchkiss is a man. They turn her into a woman for the game. They've done the same thing here, which is pretty cool. So it's Simon Mueller is the manager. Also, Deirdre, there's a character named Deirdre here, and I don't think it's supposed to be the same Deirdre that we've met in the games. It's just another character. You know too much, Nancy Drew. I do. You can't know enough, Nancy Drew. This is correct, Tara. Nancy Drew is life. But yeah, that's the point of me going through these specific books, is because these are the Nancy Drew books that the games are based off of. That's the reason I'm reading them on stream, is so that we can kind of compare them together. So those are my two biggest comparisons so far. All right, Chapter 3. Nancy and George hurried across the marble lobby, accompanied by very loud movie music. It sounded like a chase scene before the intermission, when Brady and Deirdre were to be introduced quickly. Who was the figure in the ski mask? Why did he kidnap Bess? Nancy wondered. Was he really after Brady, or did he settle for her friend? Nancy? George stopped short before they reached the office. You don't think he'd hurt her or anything, do you? Nancy pushed that thought away. It wouldn't do Bess any good for her to panic. If she was going to help her friend, she needed a clear head. No way, George, Nancy said firmly. Besides, we're going to find her before anything like that could happen. From the auditorium, they could hear the music swell one last time, then wild applause sounded, and finally the crowd chanted, Brady! Brady! Sounds like his fans have really gotten the chance to meet their hometown hero, George said with a shadow of a smile. Too bad Bess is missing this. The two friends opened the door to the manager's office. They heard Simon Mueller in the inner office talking on the phone. Nancy heard enough through the half-open door to know he was talking to someone from an international press agency, telling them about the attempted kidnapping of his hottest star. A moment later, he dialed another number, arranging with the Tudor Hotel for Brady and Deirdre to stay on through the weekend. What do you think he's up to? George asked in a whisper. My instincts tell me that Simon Mueller has figured out that this kidnapping is a golden opportunity for publicity. That's right, Mueller was talking to yet another person. It's just like I told you. Your paper will love this story. Local boy, teen heartthrob, nearly gets kidnapped and comes this close. Simon held his index finger and thumb together as if the reporter were in the room with him to see it. To catching the guy who took another hostage. He feels so bad about it, he's going to stay in town the whole weekend just to help find this guy. Nan, you're right. Why else talk to the press? George asked, sitting down in a chair beside the desk. Nancy lifted the phone and used the free outside line to call her friend Detective Ryan. As quickly and efficiently as possible, she filled him in on the details of Bess's kidnapping. He'll be right over, she told George as she replaced the receiver. Both George and Nancy jumped then, just as the door to the office was opened and Nicholas Falcone burst into the room. Locks of his dark, wavy chestnut hair were sticking out from his head, and there was a wild look in his amber eyes. Despite his youth, it couldn't have been more than a year since he graduated from college. Nancy knew that Nicholas's energy was what made him so good at getting people stirred up to fight for a cause. What's happened? He demanded. I just met Joseph Hughes in the lobby, and he said something about a missing girl. Something about a kidnapping? That's right, Nancy answered. A guy in a ski mask tried to nab Brady Armstrong, but he got our friend Bess instead. Nicholas slammed his fist down on the desk. It figures that something like this would happen here in this theater, as if the place didn't have problems enough of its own without this. Excuse me, but it's my friend whose life is in danger, Nancy replied dryly, thinking that Falcone's concern for the building was just a little misplaced. I'm sorry, he said, his dark eyes reflecting his remorse. It's just that we're trying to save this theater from being torn down, you know? We know, George spoke up. I mean, I've seen your picture in the paper, and we know about Bart Anderson. Anderson. When I think of what he'll do to this place. A fiery light appeared in Nicholas's eyes again. My great-grandfather and my grandfather, as a young apprentice, helped build this theater. Most of the ornate plasterwork on the ceilings and around the stage is theirs. I can't bear to think of it all being destroyed. I don't blame you, Nancy said, her feelings toward him softening. I hope you win your fight. And I hope your friend is found safe, Nicholas answered. Nancy was about to thank him when Simon Mueller came out of the inner office. He looked awfully pleased with himself, and Nancy found herself resenting him. One of her best friends had been kidnapped, and this man was using her misfortune to promote his star. Any word yet? Mueller asked. No, but the police are on their way, Nancy answered as she headed to the door. I'm going to start looking for Bess. If the two of you, she said, indicating Falcone and Mueller, want to join us, we could use the help. After all, that person in the ski mask was trying to kidnap your star. I have things to do here, Simon said. I'm expecting several phone calls, and I'll help, Nicholas said, but first I have to try to call my grandfather again. He was supposed to meet me here, and I'm a little worried that he hasn't shown up. I tried to reach him, but there's no answer. I'm sure Joseph wouldn't mind if you want to use this phone, George said to Nicholas. We'll meet you in the lobby. As they were on their way out, the phone rang and Simon rushed back into the inner office to pick it up. Nancy waited with her heart in her throat, hoping that it might be some news, but from Simon's side of the conversation, she could tell it was only another reporter. She put her arm around George. Come on, think of it as a treasure hunt with Bess waiting for us at the end. George didn't answer, but gave Nancy a weak smile in return. As they left the office, it occurred to Nancy that for right now, Simon Mueller had to be her prime suspect. He was the only one really benefiting from this ordeal. Moments later, Nancy, George, and Nicholas met in the lobby near the refreshment counter to plan their search of the building. Nancy was acutely aware of every passing minute. Time was running out. The movie would be over soon, and then the theater would be so full of screaming teenagers that it would be impossible to search the main areas. As they were ready to start looking, Joseph came running down the stairs from the projection booth overhead. He'd been running the film. His wrinkled face was flushed with excitement. I just got a phone call from the kidnapper, he said. It came through on the house phone in the projection room. Nancy's heart leapt into her throat. The kidnapper. So the man in the ski mask really was a kidnapper, but what did he want with Bess? What did he say? What does he want? George stammered as she grabbed Joseph's sleeve. Well, he isn't asking for money, like most kidnappers, Joseph said, rubbing his chin. What did he want, Joseph? Nancy asked. It was really very strange, Joseph said slowly. What was? From the abrupt way she asked the question, Nancy saw that George was getting impatient. Joseph met Nancy's eye. What he said? He paused. Which is? Nancy prodded. The old man seemed to need to have his memory jarred. He said, I have the girl, and she's safe for now. George sighed with relief, and Nancy waited for Joseph to go on. And? Then he told me, well, let me make sure I got this right. He paused again. Yes, he said, if you let them tear down the Royal Palladium, I guarantee you'll never see her again. End of chapter 3. Let me catch up. I would love to have be a voice in the Nancy Drew games. Gosh, that would be such a dream. Fight, 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 fight. Have a great day at work, Shannon. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for being here, Heartless. Got 2 more chapters. I need to make a Heartless Shroom in Holland's sound effects. I should try to do that today before I forget. Sorry, I'm just taking a quick stretch break. Fun fact, quick fact. I don't say this a lot because often there's no reason for me to. But as far as like Nancy Drew guys, you know, everybody's all like, oh, Henry Bollet or Dave or Ned, and I'm like Thanos, obviously. But my second choice would be Nicholas Falcone. Fun fact, quick fact. I like Nick Falcone. He's a good one. He's a good character. Anyway, moving on. Chapter 4. The Royal Palladium? Nancy echoed. What's the Royal Palladium? She asked, her eyes searching Joseph's face. That was the name of the theater before it became a movie house, Nicholas said. My grandfather told me that, he explained. Even so, he seemed as confused as they were. Nancy turned back to Joseph. Did you recognize the caller's voice? No, it was kind of muffled, like he was talking out the side of his mouth. Was his voice deep or high? In the middle, I'd say. I'm sorry I can't be more help, Nancy. That's okay, Joseph. You've helped a lot, Nancy said, laying her hand on the old man's arm. Well, it isn't much. I just wish I'd been there when that scoundrel nabbed young Bess. Unfortunately, I must have been up in the projection room making the introduction over the PA and getting ready to run the film. You know I have to do everything around here these days. Set up the movies, clean, run the office. That's okay, Joseph, George said. We know you did everything you could. She took Nancy aside. What's wrong, George? Nancy asked. I don't know, Nancy, George began. But Joseph's so old. Do you think he got the message right? What if he missed something, like some clue about where Bess might be? She bit her fingernail absent-mindedly. I just wish we'd been there when the kidnapper called. Nancy was about to answer her friend when the front doors of the theater opened and a half-dozen uniformed police officers rushed into the lobby. Thank goodness they've arrived, Nancy breathed a sigh of relief. She turned to George and said with as much confidence as she could muster, with all these men and women, I'm sure we'll find her. After Joseph had explained to the police about the kidnapper's message, Detective Ryan turned to Nancy. Okay, he said, the first thing we do is try to find the girl. What about the phone call? Nancy asked. Shouldn't we be trying to follow that lead too? Ryan smiled. We should, but only after we find Bess. Then we can worry about who made the call. My officers and I will search the dressing rooms upstairs and the basement. Why don't you concentrate on the auditorium and backstage? We'll all meet back there to report what we found. I'm really sorry to do this to you, Nicholas Falcone said. I wanted to help search for your friend, but I have to drive out to my grandfather's house. He's not answering, and I'm a little bit worried about him. I'm afraid you won't be allowed to leave without an escort, friend, Ryan said. Henry, he motioned to a young police officer. Please accompany Mr. Falcone and bring him back here. I have a few questions for him. Why? George asked when Nicholas was out of earshot. Isn't he okay? He seems so concerned and nice, and he doesn't even know Bess. Yes, said Nancy, and that's the problem. Why was he hanging around? To see where we're going to search, or did he really want to help us? If the kidnapper wants to save the theater, who would benefit more from taking Bess than Nicholas? He's got a great big motive. Ryan looked at her, tapped the side of his head, and winked. That's my girl, he said. Come on, let's get going. Several hours later, the girls collapsed into two of the plush front row seats in the auditorium. The floor beneath their feet was sticky from spilled soda. Popcorn and candy wrappers lay everywhere, discarded by the screaming throng that was now long gone. Nancy and George were too tired even to appreciate the gracious, old-world beauty of the elegant theater around them. They were dirty, exhausted, and discouraged. They had searched and searched, but they had uncovered no sign of Bess. Come on, girls, you have to eat something, a tall, handsome police officer said as he shoved a bag of hamburgers and french fries under their noses. One of the guys brought these back for you. No, thank you, Nancy said. Just looking at food made her think of Bess, who was constantly dieting to lose the same 5 pounds. Come on, the officer said, pulling a cheeseburger from the bag. You two have been crawling through every nook and cranny of this place for hours. You've got to eat. He's right, George said, taking a burger from the bag and unwrapping it. We're not going to help Bess by starving. Nancy absently took the bag from the officer, then handed it to George, who took out a bag of fries and began eating. Have you found your friend? A male voice asked. They turned around to see Nicholas standing behind them, a concerned look on his dark face. No, I'm afraid not, Nancy answered. We've searched all evening, and the police are convinced that Bess isn't here. They're giving up the search for the night. And how about you, Nancy? Nicholas said, sitting down behind her. Are you convinced she isn't here? Nancy turned in her seat to face him. Not at all. I'm sure she is here. There were too many people in and around the theater for them to get out of here, and no matter how much we've searched, there are still hundreds of cubbyholes in this old place that we haven't checked yet. This has got to be the best hiding place in town. Did you find your grandfather? Nancy asked, changing the subject. Although her tone was casual, her blue eyes were searching Nicholas's face intently. He loved this theater, and he wanted to preserve his grandfather's and great-grandfather's art. Did he kidnap Bess? Nicholas glanced away nervously. I did, he said. You know, I was worried for nothing. He was home the whole time. Did the police question you? Nancy asked. Yeah, when I got back, but I just told them I was outside protesting when she was taken. They'll check my story, they said. I had lots of witnesses. How come your grandfather didn't answer the phone? George wanted to know. He didn't hear the phone ringing because he was out in his studio. Your great-grandfather and grandfather did beautiful plasterwork. Nancy pointed to the embossed designs that framed the stage and the ceiling. Cherubs with trumpets in their hands flew on either side of the red velvet curtains. They don't build places like this anymore, Nicholas said sadly. Artists like my grandfather aren't interested in the work, and even if they were, no one would pay them to do it. People don't want beauty and glamour anymore. Guys like Bart Anderson are only out for money. They heard the side door of the theater open. Turning to see who it was, Nancy saw a large, beefy man with a bulldog face push his way past Joseph, who'd opened the door. Speak of the devil and he'll appear, Nicholas muttered under his breath. That's Bart Anderson himself. The man walked over straight to Nicholas. Without glancing at Nancy or George, he stood and glowered at Nicholas, his hands on his thick waist. Just what do you think you're trying to pull, Falcone? Anderson demanded. I don't know what you're talking about, Nicholas answered, meeting Anderson's look. The police called and told me that some idiot has kidnapped a young woman and won't let her go till we promise not to demolish the theater. That's right, Nancy interrupted, and that young woman is my friend Bess Marvin, and she's still missing. Yeah, well, I'm sorry about your friend, Anderson said with a feeble attempt at sympathy, but I'm not going to have my project jeopardized. He pointed to Nicholas with a jerk of his thumb. Not by any crackpot or committee of do-gooders organized against me. This place is coming down on schedule 1 month from today, and that's final. Mr. Anderson, Nicholas said, emphasizing the Mr. No one on my committee has anything to do with this kidnapping. We wouldn't use your kind of tactics. Anderson ignored him and turned back to Nancy. This building's coming down, he said, but you don't have to worry about your friend. These clowns might be stupid enough to grab her, but I doubt they'd actually hurt her. When it's my friend's life or anyone's life at stake, I'm not willing to take that risk, Nancy said. Anderson gave Nancy one final glare, then turned on his heels and stormed out of the auditorium. A couple of minutes later, Nicholas followed him out. Okay, George, Nancy said, standing and crumpling what remained of her burger and wrapper. Let's make one last search. Half an hour later, the two friends were going through the leading lady's dressing room. We'll just check this room one more time, Nancy said. If we don't find anything, we'll go home for the night. Nancy pulled the cushions off the sofa and ran her hands between the folds in the upholstery. George was on her hands and knees combing the floor. I found something jammed in the back of the sofa, Nancy shouted. Take a look. She held out a black ski mask with red trim around the eyes and mouth. George shuddered. Now we know for sure that he or she did bring Bess in here, she said, but that doesn't take us any closer to finding her, does it? I suppose not, Nancy said quietly, obviously thinking about something else. What is it, Nan? Something bothering you? The mask. How could we have missed it earlier? I don't think we did. Someone wants us to know Bess is still here. But who, Nancy? George asked, her voice strained and high. In her hand she was clutching the ski mask, a menacing reminder of their missing friend. It could have been Mueller, since the kidnapper was probably after Brady and not Bess. He could have done it as a publicity stunt. Andy doesn't have an alibi. Deirdre says he wasn't with them during the time of the kidnapping. Exactly, Nancy said. And then there's Nicholas. He loves this theater and maybe saw the kidnapping as a way of saving it. Maybe, but I can't believe it about Nicholas. He seems so concerned about Bess. Nancy shook her head. That could still be a cover-up. He was outside picketing the whole time, unless he left it for some reason. Well, we'll have to check that out. They had reached the lobby. Joseph was in his office still. Nancy wondered briefly if he lived at the theater as she raised a hand to wave goodbye. George was just about to push through the door when it swung in, almost knocking her down. I'm glad I found you, Nicholas said. From the look on his face, Nancy knew he had bad news. What's wrong? She asked. It's Bart Anderson, Nicholas said. While you were searching again, he and I had a little chat in front of the theater. And? Nancy asked, pushing him to continue. He got so mad at me he moved up the date, Nicholas said. What date? George wanted to know. He's going to tear this theater down in 3 days. End of chapter 4. Can't we have a Nick Falcone appreciation stream? When I play the final scene again, we'll definitely have a Nick Falcone appreciation stream. Large and beefy, exactly how I like my meals. That's fine looking ski mask, alright, but now is not the time for skiing. It's not the time to use this. Is he bringing flowers? Highway lurk, book stream, and licorice. Traffic and heat is no problem then. Are you gonna go get some licorice? one more chapter. Yeah. More dancing. Everybody mambo! Da, 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 da. Oh, you always have licorice in the car in case traffic gets stuck? I gotcha. Okay, last chapter of the day. Chapter 5. Here we go. It's been 24 hours since Bess was kidnapped, and we still don't know anything, Nancy said in desperation. We're running out of time. Something's got to give. How could Bart Anderson do this? George said, dusting her jeans. He can't tear this building down when Bess is still inside. Maybe he's trying to pressure the police into stepping up the investigation and finding Bess, Nancy suggested. I don't know. Maybe he knows something we don't know. It could be a ploy. You mean he kidnapped Bess and he's using this whole thing as a way of getting the building torn down faster? George asked. Nancy ran her hands through her hair. I don't know what to think, George. I feel so frustrated and helpless. I can't think logically with Bess missing. I know I should be checking out our suspects, but I keep thinking that Bess is here and we've got to find her. Maybe the police are right, Nan. Maybe Bess isn't here, George said gently. She's here, Nancy replied. It just doesn't make sense to me that the kidnapper would take her out of the theater if he wants to guarantee that it doesn't get torn down. I'm staying here until they call off the demolition, but if we don't find proof, we're lost and the demolition won't be called off. Just then, footsteps and low voices sounded. Nancy and George turned to watch Bart Anderson's men trooping through the auditorium. Nancy had been seeing the crew off and on all day as they studied the building, deciding where to place their dynamite charges. This time, Bart Anderson himself was with them. I'll be back in a minute, George. Nancy stood up and hurried over to him. They met in front of the stage. Can I have a word with you, Mr. Anderson? She asked. I'm busy now, he said. This is important, and what I have to say is pretty important, too. Nancy said politely but firmly. All right. He glanced at the heavy gold watch on his wrist. You've got 4 minutes. Are you really going to go through with the demolition in 3 days, even when a young woman's life is in danger? Nancy fought with herself to keep the anger out of her voice. He scowled down at her. Look at you, Miss Drew, he said sarcastically, pointing to his crew. These men are specialists. They're paid by the hour. I wouldn't have them here if I didn't mean to bring this place down on schedule. But my friend is still in the building, Nancy said, trying to control her feelings of frustration and rage. The police don't think so, he answered offhandedly, and that's enough for me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Anderson moved away from Nancy, but she followed him. And what about the kidnapper's threat? She asked determinedly. Anderson turned to face Nancy. He shrugged. I told you yesterday it's pretty obvious to me who took her. Falcone or a member of that stupid committee of his. They're crazy, but they aren't murderers. As soon as this place is leveled, they'll realize they've lost and they'll let her go. I wish I could be as sure of that as you seem to be, Nancy said, her voice rising. To be honest, Mr. Anderson, I don't think you care what happens to Bess as long as your project goes on uninterrupted. Anderson lifted a bushy eyebrow. Oh, is that so? I'm afraid it is. Your new entertainment complex is more important than a girl's life. What's going on in here? Nancy turned to see Detective Ryan entering the auditorium. Behind him were Nicholas Falcone and Joseph Hughes. We could hear you two all the way out into the lobby, the detective said. Nancy was only trying to reason with Mr. Anderson. George had come up to them and was defending her friend. You aren't really going to let him tear this building down after what the kidnapper said, are you? Nancy asked Ryan as he walked down the aisle toward them. Isn't there something that you can do? Nancy knew Ryan didn't like Bart Anderson or what he was doing. He sympathetically placed a hand on Nancy's shoulder. There's not enough evidence to prove that Bess is in the theater, he said as gently as possible. Unless we come up with something soon, we'll have to allow the demolition to proceed. Either way, it's late. I say we all get a good night's sleep and make a fresh start in the morning. Nancy looked at George and knew she was thinking the same thing. They had to come up with proof that Bess was still in this theater, and fast. The group gathered around the fireplace in the Drews' living room later that evening wasn't a happy one. Nancy, George, Carson Drew, and Hannah Gruen, the Drews' housekeeper, sat on the sofa. I can't believe that this has happened to Bess, I can't read. Let me start over. I just can't believe that this has happened to Bess, Hannah said as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. You've got to find her. We will, Hannah. Nancy put a hand on the woman's shoulder. She'll be all right. She has to be. It's too bad you can't tell Bess's parents, Hannah said, looking across the room at the telephone. I know, Nancy answered, of all the times for them to be touring Africa. Her father had tried to reach the Marvins since Bess disappeared, but they were unreachable. Mr. Drew walked over to the fireplace and held his hands out to the blaze. He was feeling chilled, even though it wasn't cold in the house or outside. Nancy watched her father and knew he was thinking how he'd feel if it had been his own daughter who was kidnapped. She stopped herself thinking those thoughts. It wasn't the time to let her imagination or emotions take hold. The only thing she could do for Bess was to solve the case and find her. Dad, what do you know about Nicholas Falcone? She asked. I've never met him, but I know his grandfather, Louis Falcone. We've served together on the Building Preservation Committee. Carson turned and looked at her curiously. Why? It's possible Nicholas may be behind the kidnapping. He loves that old theater, and I think he'd do almost anything to save it. Who else do you have on that mental list of yours, Nancy? Mr. Drew asked, his handsome face drawn in concentration. Well, there's Simon Mueller. I think we told you about him, Brady and Deirdre's manager, she said. She explained to Hannah and her father how Mueller had used the kidnapping for publicity. I know, Carson said. I saw today's headlines in the papers. But do you think that's motivation enough to do something as serious as kidnapping? Your dad's got a point there, Nan, George said. I don't know, Nancy went on. I don't trust Bart Anderson either, but he doesn't really have anything to gain from the kidnapping except that the demolition is now happening sooner. Carson Drew said as he sat down in a leather wingback chair. He looked very tired. I'm familiar with Anderson's dealings here in River Heights. He sometimes operates in the gray area of the law, but I've never known him to cross the line into illegal activity. Nancy was about to ask her father what else he knew about Anderson when the doorbell rang. Who could that be at this hour? Hannah asked, hurrying into the entrance hall. I'll get it, Hannah, Nancy said, following her. When Hannah opened the door, they saw a young man standing on the porch with a wreath of flowers in his hands. Hi, I'm from Blossoms and Bows florist shop, he said. He wore a sheepish, confused look on his freckled face. I'm supposed to deliver this to Nancy Drew? Nancy stepped forward to receive the flowers. A cold shock washed over her when she realized there were no ordinary bouquet. This is a funeral wreath, she said. Who sent this? She asked, her voice tight with tension. I don't know, the boy said. There was an envelope shoved under the shop door. It had money in it and instructions about what kind of wreath to send, where, and when. I had to take it home with me and deliver it tonight. Look, Nancy, Hannah said. There's a card with it, too. She pointed to a dark purple envelope that stuck up from the middle of the wreath. Nancy plucked the card from the flowers and ripped the envelope open. Everyone leaned over her shoulder as Nancy read the big block letters out loud. I don't want to hurt the girl, but if the Royal Palladium dies, she will be killed too. The next morning, Nancy couldn't stop thinking about that funeral wreath as she and George made their way past a small group of teenagers who had come to the theater hoping to catch a glimpse of their beloved Brady. Nancy quickly scanned the line of picketers to her right and saw that Nicholas was not with them this morning. Could he have sent that wreath? He had to be her number one suspect because he had the strongest motive. But then, Simon Mueller had the studio eliminate 2 stops on his star tours so they could remain in River Heights longer to capitalize on the publicity. The security guards who was posted at the door allowed the girls to pass without question. He recognized them from the day before. As they entered the lobby, they saw Joseph Hughes polishing the brass handrail on the staircase up to the balcony. Nancy's heart went out to him. This building was scheduled to be torn down in 2 days, but he was still giving the place its usual care. Good morning, Joseph, she said. He looked up from his work. Good morning, young ladies, he said. Have we heard anything new about Bess? No, George replied. We were hoping maybe you had. Not a thing. I slept in the office last night. I hoped that maybe that fellow would call again and I could talk him into letting her go, but nobody called or came by. Thanks for staying, Joseph, Nancy said. You're a good friend. Nancy was about to look for Detective Ryan when Joseph stopped her with a raised hand. You know, I can't believe this, but I almost forgot to give this to you. He reached into his pocket. Last night when I was vacuuming in the leading lady's dressing room, I found something on the floor. I don't know if it belongs to Bess or not. He pulled something out of his pocket that caught the light and glistened like a miniature chandelier. George gasped. Oh, Nancy, she said. It's Bess's rhinestone earring. End of chapter 5. Let me catch up. Pretty sure all streams should just be low-key Nick Falcone or Thanos. Yeah, Thanos is number 1. had to run out unexpectedly, and I think that's okay, Nicole. Hello, Yummy Rocks. Thank you so much for the follow. Welcome to the channel. Officially, let me introduce myself. My name is V, is what most people call me. It's short for Victoria or Tori. You can feel free to call me any of the three. I do a lot of different streams. As you've caught me this morning, I do live reading streams. I've been going through the Nancy Drew series that the Nancy Drew PC games are based on, since each of the PC games is based on one of the physical books. So I've been going through those books. I also read. I'm also reading the Lemony Snicket series, Series of Unfortunate Events, out loud on stream. I do those Nancy Drew games as well. I also do a lot of Nintendo, so a lot of Pokemon, Zelda, Splatoon, that sort of thing. I also do occasionally reading streams on very rare occasions. But thank you so much for the follow. I hope you enjoy your time here, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Hello, Zach. I will call you Zach. If I forget that, please forgive me, but you can feel free to remind me until I remember. The main difference between the books and the games are the amount of "I can't do that yet" lines. That's true. After this book, the games have little to do with the book. Really? I haven't read all of them. I've only read about a third of them so far, but I do own all of them, so some of the readings I do of the game books will be like new to me too. Well, guys, that's actually the end of it for me today. Since I was only going to go through 5 chapters today. Let me see how many chapters there are total in this book. It doesn't say. There are 16, and I've read 5, so we still have 11 chapters to go. But I've read about a third of the book, so I'm going to go ahead and stop here since I like to do books in 3 parts. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. I'm going to get some stuff done around this house here. And I'm going to make Heartless Shroom and Holland's sound effects that she had bought. Oh, maybe I said incorrectly. I do rare occasions music streams. That's correct. Pretty sure Callum's back. Whoa. Whoa, whoa. Yeah. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day. I'm going to work on some sound effects. I'm also going to work on setting up some other, because spoilers, the only scenes that I've created and like remade here in this computer's OBS is the reading ones, because I knew that my reading stream was going to be the first one. So I'm going to build the rest of my scenes, make those 2 sound effects that people have bought, and then do a little bit of work around the house. But no, let me see who's, before I say we're not raiding somebody, which that's another thing I need to do, is create a raid command. Hang on one second. Let me see if there's anybody I want to raid. No, there's nobody really streaming that I'm feeling like I should raid. So we're not going to raid today. But yes, have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody. Please take care. I will be streaming tomorrow evening once I get, no, not tomorrow. Tomorrow's Independence Day. Have a safe 4th of July with your family if you live here in the States. And if you don't live in the States, still have a wonderful 4th of July. I will not be streaming tomorrow. There's no Wind Waker Wednesday because of the holiday. So I will be back Thursday evening after I get off work. So about 6 o'clock, I'll be going live. My plan is to do a little bit of Detective Pikachu that night. So I'll see you guys then. Please enjoy the rest of your day. I'll leave you with a few minutes, another 60 to 90 seconds of music. But otherwise, please, as always, take care of yourselves. There is much love from me to you, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.